Good evening. It's November 4, 2024. This is a meeting of the Council Rock School District Board of School Directors Policy Committee meeting. I'm Ed Tate chairing tonight, and we'll go around the table for introductions.
Yota Pali School Board.
Matthew McCarthy, Tech Innovation.
Nicole Khan, School Board.
It's November.
Bob Hickey, School Board.
Michael Roosevelt, School Board.
Ron Spring, Council Rock.
Andy Sanko, Superintendent.
Ann Horner, School Board.
Linda Stone, School Board.
All righty. Thanks, everybody. We'll start with Mr. Ron Spring, who'll lead us through the agenda.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. So today's agenda really mirrors the last board meeting as well as the previous policy committee meeting. There's no new policies. There is one policy that there are options provided based on comments at the last board meeting. All the other policies, until the last one, which is just for purposes of discussion, are exactly identical to what was presented at the October board meeting. And all the policies, again, other than the last policy which deals with electronic devices, all the other policies that we'll be touching base on today will be presented for a second and final read at the November board meeting in a couple of weeks. So the first policy 200, and I'll go through them again in a little less detail than I have the last 2 or 3 times, but just for purposes so everyone is aware. The first one is policy 200, which is enrollment of students. And again, the main change is further elaboration on how to address enrollment of students, particularly students experiencing educational instability and children of active duty military families. And we'll see that theme in a couple of our policies that are coming up for second read. And to sum up again, and I don't want to reiterate everything that we talked about in the past, it really provides and illustrates the level of flexibility or additional flexibility we need to provide when enrolling students with who are suffering or experiencing educational instability, as well as those who may have been asked to move due to military orders last minute and may not have all of their documentation necessary for enrollment. So that is, again, policy 200. And I provided the red line again, same red line as last time, same red line as at the board meeting.
And that's a PSBA recommendation to include this language.
It's actually also based on statutory amendment, based on.
The reason that this is up for review is it's a PSBA recommendation, yes or no?
It is, we utilize, I don't know if it would be a recommendation, necessarily I would attach as a recommendation. We utilize PSBA to reviews as model policies,
Right.
to ensure that we have the necessary legal
So
updates.
this language
So
is
yeah, so
coming-
this is coming from that PSBA's model. I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify, yeah, from their model policy that we utilize.
So not having this leaves us open
For potential liability would be, I would say yes. Particularly if we didn't follow this more than anything. If we didn't follow what was here,
right.
yeah, because this is based on, I know for students experiencing educational disability, that's the McKinney-Vento laws that deal with homeless, and that's both federal and state, I believe. For the next policy, 201, that's one of the policies that have no changes to it. But again, we are presenting it just for review. I guess for review by the board and to have a new vote on it so we can indicate that we have reviewed it and it does meet the necessary legal requirements. Eligibility of non-resident students. Again, deals with, particularly with students suffering from educational instability, as well as those that are children of military families. With respect to students of experiencing educational instability, really the wording is the same, it just extends homeless to also students in foster care or other forms of educational instability. Other than that, the wording is fairly identical to what it was previous to this amendment. The new paragraph deals with children of military families. And it also sets forth the due process rights that parents have if it is determined that the student isn't eligible for enrollment in Council Rock. So the next policy, 203, is the policy where we have two options for the first paragraph. And that was based on Mr. Hidalgo had some discussion at the last board meeting. So speaking with committee leadership, we spoke about addressing Mr. Hidalgo's concerns, as well as keeping the initial phrasing for purposes of discussion. Just for the record, Mr. Hidalgo did send an email today saying that option 2 did capture what he was expressing and did address his concerns. So with him not being here, I'm glad he did that, so I didn't misrepresent anything. And really what the difference is in option 1, it talks about the board requiring that the guidance and orders from the state and local health officials, as well as board policy and administrative regulations, et cetera, be followed. Mr. Hidalgo raised concerns with respect to what if there is a conflict between local and state health officials. So looking at some other districts and seeing their wording as well, and I did run this by the solicitor, both are legally permissible per our solicitor, so it would be open to the board. It discusses that the board will discuss the guidance and orders from state and local health officials, and then upon that consideration, the board requires that established board policy and so on. And that's the same language as what we previously had.
And the administration is fine with option 2 theoretically?
Yeah. We're fine with either way, option 1 or 2, however the board sees fit, but we are okay with it.
Questions, comments?
I think it's a good pickup.
Yeah, no, I agree completely, because we experienced that during COVID where we had a conflict between local policy and state policy. So there's no way to follow both if there's a conflict. So if nobody objects,
I mean, the way I understand it now, it's like it says that the board knows better than the health experts. And yes, we'll consider, but it's gonna be up to us to decide, so that doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know, this is not a health board, so if it was a health board, yeah, but we do not know better than the experts. So I'm okay with option 1.
anybody else?
Well, for option 2, I mean, both work, like you said, taking into Joe's, Mr. Hidalgo's, what he had said, option 2 seems to work, and you pointed out, what if there's it hopefully would never happen, but what if there is a conflict? So at least we have a little bit of leeway as opposed to a will.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, I don't see how option 2 places us above or knowing better. I think it puts the school board in a position where you're not stuck trying to agree with both if they contradict each other. It doesn't say which one you have to go with. It's the first one says you have to do both. What if there's a conflict? That says nothing about the school board knowing better,
Sorry.
but I understand your point.
Anybody else? We're sort of at a impasse here. Linda?
I really don't have a problem with leaving that open in option 2. Is clearly, we're not going to do something, we can't do anything that is illegal or goes against any laws or regulations. So I would assume that it at least gives you a little bit of leeway with, as you said, if the state and local authorities are in disagreement. I think they are both saying the same thing anyway, because you'd be left with the same option and option 1, so I
Well,
don't know
if, yeah,
that it
if
really
there was
matters.
a conflict, then we would have to
You'd still
make
have
a
to-
decision anyway.
Right.
All right. We could bring this forward with the 2 options for a vote at the board meeting.
I mean, that's first read, right? Or second?
It's second.
This is second read, yeah.
I'd have to check with the solicitor if we can bring it with both options.
Okay.
We probably could, I just don't want to definitely say yes without checking the solicitor, because I wouldn't want to put the board in a bad situation at the board table if he's.
Can we
Missing
agree
2.
here?
I'm just saying, we're missing 2. I mean, I was okay with option 2. I think Mr. Roosevelt was okay with option 2. I think you were
Fine with
okay, Ms. Polly, I believe, option 1. We haven't heard from,
I'm good with option 2. I think it's clear that it gives the opportunity that the board will consider the guidance and orders. So it's more clear, that's it. I mean, I understand, and we're not health professionals, I'm not a doctor. But it's considering the guidance and orders from the state, both the state and local health officials. That's it. It's clear.
So we'll consider, but we have to follow the regulations. And if there is a conflict, that's a big problem because, you know, you cannot have like 2 different official sources telling you to do different things.
what we did. During COVID, we had exactly that situation where the state and the federal government was recommending one thing, and our Bucks County local health official was recommending something entirely different. So that, you know, you're familiar with that. I mean, and it led to, you know, huge problems within the district of, you had one side arguing, this is what the state says, and the other side, well, no, this is what the guy who's on the ground is saying,
The one
so.
who disappeared?
What?
The one who's made the statement and then he could not be found to support that statement, because I don't know if the official line was that he disagreed. I think that's the interpretation of people, that he disagreed.
I think his recommendation was to treat COVID as a flu-like model. And he, like I said, not to go into all the ins and outs of what happened, but his recommendation was to treat it as a flu-like model as opposed to quarantining for 10 days and doing all the other stuff. So who do you go with? The person who's closest to the situation in Bucks County? I mean, you would hope it would never happen again.
Right.
But I don't want to say fool me once, shame on you, but, you know, if it would come up again, what do we do? I mean, we're not going to just ignore everybody's advice and just say, like you said, we're not doctors, we don't know any better, but we're going to look at both and then we'll decide what to follow, what we think is best for the district.
Ms. Stone?
Can we add, can we say the board, as reading option 2, the board will consider the guidance and orders from state and local health officials when guidance from the state and local authorities are not in alignment? And we,
So-
maybe if somehow we
Really are-
clarify, then we follow their guidance.
Let me see
So
if I got
that,
that.
or requires guidance, and then say, and then just add a sentence to the end of the option 1. The board will consider the guidance when their recommendations are not in alignment.
It's only implicit in the writing the way it is.
Well, but if they are in alignment, we will follow their guidance. That's what I'm saying.
So my point is that you have to follow a health expert recommendation, like entity, okay? So it's not our consideration to create that. So it doesn't, I don't want to dictate right now if it's gonna be the local or the federal or the state, but it has to be some a health expert entity's recommendation.
We're saying you're still going to be left with a decision to be made when they're not in alignment.
But it has to be one or the other, not like your own. What I'm saying is that we cannot, as a board, create advice about health issues. We can follow guidelines and then choose a way to implement it, but we don't have the knowledge.
But I think there's a way, though, to just give us the ability to say, the ability to say, wait, if the orders are not clear from either authority, then we will consider and make a decision. I don't know how you write it, but.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
We actually don't have to follow the advice of either. I mean, we open ourselves up to liability in a big way, I'm just saying, but technically, we don't have to follow either. You know, if we disagreed as a board that we didn't want to follow either the state or the local guidelines, we could say no, and like I said, it opens ourselves up for
Yeah, I would
liability,
want to
so.
go there.
No, I'm not saying I want to go there, I'm just saying, but we don't have to. You know, we get to decide as a board what we're going to do, so as I said, you know, I actually like the fact that we'll consider the guidance. If you want to put language in there about if there's disagreement, okay, I'm okay with that, you know.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, didn't we?
No, that's good.
All right, Ms. Khan?
All right, so, I mean, I guess the only difference between option one and option two is the wordage of will consider versus the board requires, right?
Yep.
In this hypothetical situation, the board will consider. I guess it's hard to say, because will consider meaning, I would assume they would fully consider their guidelines from the state and local health experts or officials. So I guess, I don't know, I have a little bit of the problem, will consider, or it's optional that they will consider that, right? That's how it makes it seem, that will consider, whether they choose to or choose not to, where in option one, it doesn't really make that part as defined. So even though the language is probably in there, it just isn't defined, where that sticks out to me, will consider, it's also in red, but.
Will versus shall, like argument.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
So change it to shall consider. That's a good point.
All right, to get us off the dime, I've got a solution, which
Can I
is.
say something?
Yeah, please.
So, what Bob said, it is possible. It is possible that there is a board that doesn't want to follow any of the health experts' advice. It's very likely. I mean, it has happened in the past. So, and would that open liability? Of course. But I just don't think that a school board has that kind of, needs to have that kind of authority. We have to follow the health expert guidelines. And yeah, if they disagree, we have to decide which one we think is best. But we cannot just leave it open that, you know, maybe we don't follow any of them because we know better. I mean, and I don't know how to reword it in a way that makes sense, that everybody would be okay with it. So.
Maybe ask the lawyers to, how they could word it such that we will follow those guidelines if they're clear, and then we would decide when those guidelines aren't clear, we may have to, you know, review
Yeah.
each
I
of
see
the
where you're headed.
recommendations. I mean, maybe there's a way of,
Well, I was going to suggest that we move forward this policy for second read with option number one. And when we get to the board meeting, we can have a discussion with the full board, and it'll be the will of the board at that point. If the will of the board is to go with option two, then it goes back to option one, and we run through this again. But we could sit here and debate all night how to reword it and so forth and so on, but we are on second read. So my suggestion is that we move forward with option one, and we're going to debate it at the board meeting when we vote to adopt or not adopt.
Well, we're not actually on second read. It got put back to committee.
That's not
On
what,
first read.
that's not what Mr. Spring just said to me.
It was last board meeting itself was first read, this upcoming board meeting will be second.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, it got put back to committee at first read.
Did we approve the first read?
Yes, they will, everything was approved for the first read.
Okay, then,
Yeah,
then second.
It was said that there's still a second read,
And
so
and
we
it
all
doesn't mean we
agree.
can't make changes. Correct.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. I respect your disagreement, and we'll just continue the discussion at the board meeting if no one objects,
Just for clarification, do you want?
with option
On
one.
board, I'm sorry,
My suggestion is that we move it forward with option one.
option one, okay.
And then at the board meeting, if Mr. Hildago or anyone else wants to say, I want to discuss option two, then we have that discussion.
Can we get the language that, from the lawyers that maybe we can all agree on instead? I don't know what's the procedure,
more-
maybe we can,
Theoretically, but I'm not sure what that language would say.
I don't know, but they may be able to, you know, off the top of my head, I can't think of
All right.
a better way to write it, but maybe
Yeah.
they can.
So we'll move it forward for second read with option one, and we will ask, at the same time, we will ask our solicitors if they can suggest any language, please, Mr. Spring, if you would ask the solicitors, if they can suggest any language to address the situation in which state and local or federal give conflicting orders,
Just have-
guidance and orders.
Why not just have two of these, an option one and an option two?
But I don't know how you would do that.
Just like that.
You mean leave it
You
like
mean pass a
as
policy that
written?
has two options?
No, we're voting on this one way or the other.
Right.
So why not just have a vote for option one and a vote for option two, and
We can have-
theoretically even recommendation language or a vote for option three? I mean, we're gonna end up talking about it and voting for one way or another.
Well, I don't
That's possible.
I don't think we can move forward two versions of a policy for second read.
I would have to ask the solicitor, I haven't seen that before, so I don't know
Yeah.
if that's, one way or the other, I don't know if that's.
So then, in effect, if, say we didn't move forward with option one, then option two, if we put that in there, would be a first read.
If we would go back to first read, exactly.
With
That's-
option two in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what the board policy says.
Yeah.
If you don't approve it at second read, it goes back to first read and you recycle.
Okay.
So we're just continuing the discussion.
So just so for clarification for me, we're gonna put this forward with the wording it is right now for option one,
Yes.
and at the meeting, I will inquire from the solicitor if, what would we do if we had a situation where local and state or multiple health authorities conflicted? How would that be resolved, and is there specific wording
Yes.
that could be
Yeah.
added to the policy to address that in
Yes.
case that happens?
Another way to handle this is not put it to the next board meeting, to keep it in committee until,
No, I don't favor doing that. I mean, we're putting time and effort into this. Let's just move it forward and debate it at the board meeting.
Right. I know your concern. I mean, the concern is we're gonna have this debate at the board meeting, and we're gonna come to no resolution. So then we'll be at a board meeting until 10 o'clock discussing a policy that we know right now that we're not gonna have an agreement on. I mean, because already there's at least 4 of us who are okay with option 2 without even knowing what 2 members are saying. So I can't imagine Mr. Hidalgo would go for option one, which means you're not gonna have 5 votes to pass option one, which means we're immediately gonna kick back into option two, which is now gonna kick it back into one of the policy committee meetings. So why even bring it up to the board and waste the time, on a televised meeting Thursday night? I mean, I'm good with it. I don't care what time we get done, but other people may.
Yeah, you're assuming that there's not 5 votes in favor of option one.
Well, there's already 5 for 2, because Mr. Hidalgo proposed this and said,
Pardon me?
Mr. Hidalgo proposed this and said he agreed.
Yeah, I said I had no problem with option two. I didn't say I would vote for it over option one. I just said I wouldn't vote for option
I understand
one.
that.
Okay,
I'm not suggesting that you did.
I'm sorry.
Is there a way that we can get the solicitor and you can send it back out to us and we can have it looked at that with that proper language that we're trying to understand, that if there is a conflict and what is it we need to put in here to make sure that we do get all of that information in there?
Well, yeah.
So that we can
if-
do that without, because that will be able to get us right back out to it and then we can have it for the meeting. And then.
Yes,
Right,
if,
that's proper.
if the solicitor comes back with advice on additional or different wording, then Mr. Spring, Dr. Sanko would share it with us right away and we'll be back to first read. Yes,
Right.
we would
And
do
then
it that
we would do
way.
that. Yeah, because we
But-
would have the full information of what we're all trying to clarify.
Right, right.
Clearly state.
And if the solicitor comes back and says that they can't suggest any change in wording that would satisfy this, then we're moving forward with option one and we'll debate it at the board meeting. I'm just trying to move us forward. But yeah, I agree.
So just to clarify, I
Yeah.
want to make sure I'm doing this the right way. Well, option one
Yes.
is going to be presented at the board meeting.
Yes.
Is it at,
Potentially.
is it at the board
Let
meeting,
him,
talking to, making the request to the solicitor, or prior to the board meeting?
prior to the board meeting.
Okay.
Thank you,
So,
yes.
okay, that's right. So prior to the board, after today's meeting tomorrow, reach out to the solicitor.
Yes.
And see, again, what do we do if it conflicts? And also, what wording might be applicable, if any, to put in the policy to address that particular situation if it occurs.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the solicitor came back and said, I can't suggest a solution because there is no solution if you got a conflict, but
Well, what Yoda's saying is you don't want it to read like we can ignore all the recommendations because they conflict
Yeah.
and we just ignore them and decide on something totally different.
yeah,
So as soon as I hear from the solicitor, I will send something out.
thank you,
Thank you.
thank you.
So the next policy is, again, one of the policies that there is no change to. It's been the same policy, I believe, I was advised since 2014. There's been no changes or amendments or anything with respect to changes to the HIV infection policy, which is 103.1.
Where did that one go?
Similarly, 205, there's been no change in the policy as well. I know a question came up and we did discuss it, but just in case anyone's listening at home who may not have heard it, the question came up as to whether or not the age in the policy for postgraduate students was 22 or 21. It was initially 21, then it was changed to 22, and then based on actually a technicality, not any type of substantive legal premise, but technicality, it was brought back to 21. At some point, there is talk that it may go back to 22, which at that point we'll address it, but currently, from a legal standpoint, it is 21. So I just wanted to clarify that. I know that came up even outside of here, so I went with the committee, so I wanted to just clarify that.
Yeah, I'm just confused again, as far as the process. This 203.1, I don't have any concerns with the substance to either of these, but it says it was adopted in 2018, you mentioned 2014. And just to clarify also, neither of these have any changes There's no additional change in language.
Correct.
So why are we doing this?
Because what Mr. Spring explained before was, this will certify that the board has reviewed these policies, and it'll put a new date on them, so that it shows that these dates, that these policies are not, 2 or 3 years from now, someone won't look at this and say, 2017, this makes no sense.
It provides
It's
a
just-
baseline going forward.
Where does the date go, though? Because it was adopted, like,
So to Mr. Roosevelt's point, there haven't been amendments to this since 2014. Like some of the policies we had previously, I can't say, because I wasn't here, I can't say we even had it adopted until 2018 though. So it may have been a policy that maybe wasn't required prior to 2018, so we didn't have, but it was out there. It is a required policy now, at least I know now, I don't know when it became required. So it could be that it was just adopted in 2018, that I don't know, and we may not have had it prior.
But that's the same thing. If we change this to 2024, the next person that looks at this can say, wow, nothing's changed since 2014, and still use that 2014 language. Because it says here 2018, but you're saying it hasn't been changed since 2014. It's still not going to be changed since 2014 because we're not changing it now.
Actually,
Right.
doesn't it say, Mr. Spring, in the policy manual, it doesn't say, for the active date, it doesn't say adopted, it says last revised, doesn't it?
Yes, so
Yeah, it
is
says last
adopted.
revised.
So it'll read, it won't say adopted any longer. Next time, when this is approved, presumably, it'll say in the policy folders, it'll say last revised,
And-
Here's what it says.
like this.
And to your point, Mr. Roosevelt, I think for the next person, so I had to go back and see, because the date was 2018, I had to go back and try to see if there's been any changes between today and 2018. The next person, whoever it may be, hopefully it's still me, but the next person, whoever it may be, when it comes up again, they're not gonna have to go back to 2018. They're gonna be able to say, hey, we're good. The person who came before me made sure that this policy was good through 2024. So I really only have to go back to see if there've been any changes since 2024.
So you're suggesting, is what it sounds like, is that this is going to have a adopted date, a revised date, and a review date. So we're going to do that for all of our policies. That's what we're suggesting?
I try to
I
do
think
that.
I think it should be.
Okay.
Yeah. So the review date, since there's multiple review dates, I usually have like the last board meeting has the review date, and then I forget the exact word, the second one, but then,
Yeah, you have an adopted, a revised, and a
yeah, so the
review.
revised, even though we're not technically revising anything, I would have the revised date for when it was approved, because this way now the next person doesn't have to go all the way back to 2018 to figure out if there are any changes. They have a much shorter baseline to work from, a much closer baseline to work from.
Okay, so with 2031, you mentioned something about 2014.
I only know that because when I called, because it's going all the way back to 2018.
So,
We don't have, I don't
Yeah,
have
I'll get it
any
back.
way to look at if there's been any changes.
No, I understand
legally.
that, but what's the 2014 date?
So-
What's the significance?
The significance is when I reached out to PSBA,
Yeah.
I said, have there been any amendments to 203.1 since 2018? And their response was no. In fact, there've been no amendments since 2014.
Okay.
So that was just something they shared with me.
Thank you. So,
Well, we'll see what dates you put on it moving forward. Yeah. So our intent is to have an adopted, a reviewed, and a revised date for all policies.
Yes.
Just so that that's,
Consistent.
on the record, yeah.
because I was under the impression we just did this a couple years ago.
right.
And we
And
did it about 5 years ago.
you did it 5 years ago, but 2
Right.
years ago.
Mr.
didn't
Thorwald did it, yeah. I thought Mr.
No, we did not do, 2 years ago, we did not do a top-to-bottom systemic review of all of our policies. That hasn't been done since
Oh,
about 5 years ago.
okay. I thought Mr. Thorwald did them 2 years ago when he was policy chair.
Yeah.
No, we did not go through every policy
Okay.
during that period. That would be physically impossible because of the number of policies. I think what we did was address policies as necessary, which was fine. You don't have to do a review every 2 years.
Well, that was my
That's the
next
point.
thing, as far as having these 3 different dates. What is incumbent upon us to adjust those dates? Does this happen every year? Does this happen every 2 years? Does it happen every 5 years? I mean,
Yes, we're going through a top-to-bottom review of all of our policies, which hasn't been done in 5 years. And what we decided was that we would look at every policy as part of it. We could skip over policies for which there are no changes, but we've decided to look at every single one, and Mr. Spring will note where there's no changes, and it'll get a new date, that's all.
well, that helps. That explanation, I think, helps a lot to understand, hey, look, we want to add these 3 lines.
Yeah, Mr. Hickey and then Ms. Khan.
I agree with that and I understand it, and I guess what I'll ask though is, because I asked a question from, I don't know if I copied you or not, but I copied Ms. Oseki about reviewing a policy that's not in the, like right now we're doing the 200 policies.
Yeah,
I asked if we could review a policy in, say, the 800s.
right.
And the answer I got back was, well, when we get through the 100s and 200s, bring it up. Which means like a policy that I wanted to look at, I now have to wait until that policy comes along.
Yeah, she shared with me your email, and that's not exactly how I remember her response, but she's not here tonight, so we can discuss it when she's here.
Okay, I'm just saying, like, is that how, like, if I want to discuss a policy that's not in the 200s at the next meeting or the 100s, do I now have to wait until its turn comes in line?
You know, we haven't had this discussion. I would say that if there's a good reason that a policy needs to be discussed, and there's 5 board members that want to discuss the policy, we discuss it. But what we're just trying to do right now is just do a top-to-bottom review of the policies. Ms. Khan?
I'm a little confused why we're having this conversation. Ms. Oseki, who usually chairs our policy meetings, and out of all the policy meetings that I've been a member or attended since a board member, I've only missed one. And Ms. Oseki has regularly stated that we're doing a systematic policy review of all of our policies, starting with the 100s all the way through, with the caveat that we're addressing the ones that have the most impact on students, on daily life of students, right? I mean, they all have an impact, but like impact the greatest of the students. I don't understand. I mean, it's been stated, and she regularly states it multiple times. And to Mr. Hickey's point, you're obviously welcome to bring up any topic or concern at any point. I know you've reached out to me as well. That I don't think that implies that one board member brings up one policy and then all of a sudden it has to come up for review. Like that would be, I'm sure there's a process and systematic way to do that as well. That would be kind of chaotic. Anyone at any time can say, hey, let's review this policy. And when Mr. Spring and Mr. Tate and Ms. Oseki as the chairs have stated, this is our review process, this is what we're doing to keep it systematic, keep it organized, effective, efficient, and get through all our policies.
Yeah.
Well, I'll respond to that. Nowhere, I think, has Ms. Oseki, Mr. Springer, Mr. Tate articulated the way we've gotten the details out tonight. She did say we're going through this top to bottom, but what does that mean? She did say systematically, but what system? When did 5 people agree on that system? It hasn't happened. So that, I think, is part of this review. If we as a board of 9 are gonna go through this, why does one person or 2 people or 3 people get to decide the method of the review? That's part of it. Being a chair of a meeting doesn't mean that you're in charge. Being president of this board or vice president doesn't mean that your vote is more important than yours, mine, or Mr. Hickey's, or anybody else. Being chair means that you're running the meeting. It doesn't mean that you get to decide. You still need 5 votes, and you still need to have this in an open meeting to conform to sunshine law. So this meeting is the first that we've actually articulated what the process is and how that system works. But there hasn't been, to your point, a rhyme or a reason. So maybe you've been clear on it because you and Ms. Osecki have talked about that in the past and it seemed very organized to you. But clear to me and Mr. Hickey and perhaps others, it seemed chaotic to us. So I've appreciated this meeting because we've gotten some of these details out about how it's going to occur. And I don't have a problem with having these 3 dates. I'm just trying to understand what we're doing and how we're doing it and why we're doing it. And this meeting has accomplished that. So I think it's great. I don't have a problem moving forward, but not knowing how this is going to happen before has led to this conversation.
I completely disagree. We've had this discussion before.
When have
You're interrupting me.
When have we
You're
heard?
interrupting me.
Then please identify. what
You're interrupting me. We have discussed at this table before the fact that we were engaging PSBA to do a systematic, top-to-bottom review of all of our policies. That has been discussed numerous times. There has been nothing chaotic about any of it. You're trying to make a political point here that I find absurd. We are trying to do the work of the district. This is a very simple matter. I've done it before. It's a policy review to make sure that we are compliant and current. It's logical. We did it 5 years ago. And if you didn't understand it, I'm happy that tonight's explanation clarified it for you. But there's been nothing chaotic, and this has been in no way a mystery. We've discussed it before at this table.
Linda.
I thought it was pretty clear that we were going through the policy by number, 100, then 200, then 300. A specific question did come up at the last policy meeting about another policy, and we said, because it aligned, or it was referred to in one of the other policies that we reviewed already, and Ms. Osecki said, when we get to that policy, then we'll review it. We're not going to take every policy, well, gee, you know, we're looking at policy 200, maybe we should look at 302 that matches this, or 807 that has some wording that refers to this. She said, we're not going to do that. We're going to stick to moving in an orderly fashion, 100 to 200 to 300. I heard that more than once at policy meetings. So it's clear to me, but I don't have an issue if there's something that needs to be addressed because we have a problem, there's an issue, that would be brought up and discuss whether or not we should discuss, another policy out of turn. If there's some specific reason, I don't see why not. But otherwise, I think it's been really clear. We're going 100, 200, 300, and that's how we're moving forward. I've heard that more than once at these meetings.
Thank you. All right, where are we on that?
No, I'm still not
That's all.
done with this. I'd like to respond.
Yeah, we're moving on.
No, we're not.
Yes, we are.
Because now you're interrupting me.
No, I'm not recognizing you. I'm chairing the meeting.
I know you're not recognizing. You're doing what the two of you have done all year, is to not recognize stuff. So you're doing it again because you didn't recognize my comment. You didn't understand it. And if you did, it would have been a lot easier for you to address Mr. Hickey's question earlier of, so I have to wait till 800, number one. Number two, there wasn't a specific date to when and which 3 of you or 5 of you decided that this is the way that this board is gonna do it. The second thing is, if you did it the same way 5 years ago, why weren't these dates that we talked about agreeing to here in this policy, right here, the one that we're looking at, 203.1?
Would you like an
Why does it not have
explanation?
those? So if you did it the same way 5 years ago, why isn't it here, number one?
Would you like an explanation?
No, because now you're interrupting me. I was expecting your explanation to be in your response. Because that's what we talked about. And if
You
you
want
want
an
to turn that into political stuff,
You want an
that's
explanation
you
about,
injecting politics.
you want an explanation about why the records don't reflect the review?
No, because you're not hearing me now.
All right, we're moving on.
What I'd like an explanation to is why these three things aren't on this if you did it 5 years ago. And when and who decided that this was the systematic way of doing it.
Can the two of you take this
finally-
offline so we
And
can move
finally,
forward with the
903, if we're doing it 100 through to all the way to the end, why was 903 discussed earlier this year?
We are moving on. I heard you. You've made your point. We're going to continue with the business of this meeting. Thank you.
Wonderful.
And Mr. Tate, just so we're clear, we are one of 9. And I do not appreciate being shut down at all. Don't do that again.
Glad to hear it. Mr. Spring, where were we?
I believe the next policy is 210. 210 was, brought to us by our solicitor because it was a change with respect to a particular type of medication, and that deals with the enzyme medication for students with cystic fibrosis who can self-administer the enzyme tablets. Based on the last committee meeting, and it was inserted for the board meeting, we did add a definition of enzyme medication to 210. It's similar to the definition we have in 210.1, but we wanted to clarify that. So that's in there. There has been no change since the board meeting on that one. And similarly, for 210.1, we talk about more specifically use of asthma inhalers, epinephrine autoinjectors, and we are adding enzyme medication to the title and throughout the policy, talking about self-administration by students. It does talk about the need for a written schedule of meals because the medication is taken prior to meals rather than the requirement to immediately notify a school nurse after using it for ease for the student, and because it's more of a scheduled, regulated type of medication, that's a change in there as well. Other than that, the only change is anytime we talk about asthma inhalers or epinephrine autoinjectors, we are adding enzyme medication to the policy.
Thank you. Questions, comments? No?
Thank you for adding that. Thank you for adding that. Already.
800, 801?
801, so 801, there's no change to how it was presented at the board meeting, at the committee and the board meeting. There was a question brought up by Mr. Roosevelt at the board table. I believe Mr. Clark responded to that. If I could take a step back, there is one change, but it's not a change from the board meeting. It was a change from the initial committee meeting that we added prior to the last board meeting, dealing with fees and how the rates will be set, by our, as determined by our right to know officer, but using the rates set forth by the Office of Open Records. That was a change from last committee, but it was made prior to our last board meeting, so that remains the same. Mr. Roosevelt did raise a question with to Mr. Clark with respect to anonymity and responding to anonymous emails. We did take a further look into that. Just a little history, talking to our right to know officer, who's Mr. Rapp. In the past, we have not responded to anonymous requests. I can think of one where we got an email that we couldn't determine where the email was from, and there was no name or anything of that nature. Because it was anonymous, we were advised, per our previous, the way it was written previously, not to respond, and we didn't respond. I know Dr. Sanko shared some information with the board after the meeting, particularly that under the code, the law does provide discretion to the public body as to whether or not to answer anonymous requesters. We have not. The way the policy was amended, it further clarifies that. And just for some additional information, I did speak with Mr. Rappin. He strongly supports the way it had been written and had been carried through previously, not responding to anonymous requests. Interestingly to note, two things. The Office of Open Records, they themselves chosen, even if they have, like any other public body, they have discretion, they themselves have chosen not to respond to anonymous requests. And if we do not respond to an anonymous request and that individual or entity, whoever it may be, wants to appeal our non-response, they are not permitted to appeal anonymously. So even if they appeal, they would be then required to present their personal information because appeals aren't permitted anonymously. So that's where that information came in, and I appreciate Mr. Roosevelt bringing that up so we could look into it and follow through. So I just wanted to share that prior to any further discussion on that topic as to why, where we got the information from in response to Mr. Roosevelt's question.
Thank you. Questions, comments? All right, this will go forward for second read then. The last thing is this draft policy just for discussion. It's not first read, it's not second read, it's just for discussion.
So this is just, again, purely as a baseline for discussion to look at. We reviewed probably close to 20 different policies from other districts to kind of see what other districts have, what are best practices. I know there's been proposed legislation in both the state Senate and the state Assembly. Looking at all that, we work to create just a general mock model policy for the district. Again, only for a baseline for discussion as we go forward in the future. You'll see a big change is in definitions. We try not to pigeonhole specific devices. Like in the past, it talked about BlackBerries, it talked about Walkmans, which my kids have no idea what that is. And all those things. Because technology is changing at such a fast pace, we really try to focus more on the ability of the device and what the device can do. So any device that can X, Y, and Z, because the name of the device might change, the way it's done may change, but our concerns don't. So particularly from a definition standpoint, it talks about, devices that can capture still images or movies, that can transmit video, audio, connect to the internet, and so on. So again, it provides that broader spectrum of devices. It talks about, you'll see a lot of similar information in here too, like talks about, it prohibits electronic devices in locker rooms, bathrooms, any type of changing areas. And speaking with leadership, we added something in there, other private areas as determined by administration, because sometimes there might be other areas that may not be here that are private. I can think of, various things as, for sports and stuff like that, where you wouldn't want those devices. It talks about, just general, the fact that in theory, the policy is the same, but how it's administered can be varied at different levels. So what's done at an elementary or even a middle school may be different than how it's administered at a high school level. And we would rely on the administration, the educators in those areas to determine what's, per what the purpose of this is, ensuring that if they are used, they're used for educational purposes or, for positive contribution to educational purposes. It has some, so that's in there. It also, in a few places, specifically has carve-outs for medical reasons, for IEPs, for 504s, other reasons determined appropriately by the principal. One of the things that may refer to is if a student, especially some of the older students, they may be members of a volunteer fire department, they may be EMTs, that doesn't fall under a health reason or a 504 or an IEP, but the principal, in that case like that, you want that principal to have the discretion to say, you know what, that's for a pretty good reason. We want you to keep your pager, we want you to keep your phone, in case something like that gets called. So it really addresses a lot of stuff we spoke about, hearing that and some of the broader topics. Both, I believe both the Senate and the Assembly proposed legislations they call it a ban, but it's a ban with carve out for educational reasons and potential health reasons and potential other reasons, as determined by. So they're couching it as a ban, that's my reading of the legislation, but they have very similar carve outs to what we have here. So that's kind of where I tried to base this from. And again, it's really based on the board.
Thank you. Ms. Stone?
When I looked at this, and I read it as saying that it's only prohibiting use in locker rooms, bathrooms, and other changing areas, and then leaving everything up to the building principals as to where else it can be used.
Well, there's
I
an
mean, the
absolute.
previous policy, they came up, the principals came and spoke, right? It's a no use at all in elementary schools or middle schools, right? They put it away for the day.
Right. And if they continue to, if that's what's determined, then that's their right to determine, correct?
And so then they have their own consequences, correct?
Correct. And when you say.
And
they
that
have
was
their
when I
own-
read the old policy, it's prohibiting on the, at any time that they're in class as well. The old policy.
Yeah, I believe there may be.
It's totally restricted.
Yes, I think there may be a carve out as well. It may have that
With the
similar.
carve-outs
yeah,
for IEPs.
or other reasons,
Health
that other
reasons and so
that's
on.
true, yes. So there is an absolute legal prohibition in, like a principal doesn't have the discretion to say based on the policy, well, you know what, if you want, you can have your cell phone in the locker room. So that, that's a carve out, except, again, if there's an IEP reason or a 504 reason.
Right.
But to protect that privacy, you have an expectation of privacy in those areas.
But this is even more lenient than the previous policy because it doesn't, well, the policy that I recall reading was they can't use it at all in the classrooms. And we were always saying, oh, in high school, they don't follow the policy, but elementary school and middle school followed the policy.
I would have to take another look. I believe there was the carve out as well for
With
other
the
reasons.
carve-outs.
The other
Ignoring
reasons
the
as
carve-outs.
determined appropriate by building principal. I believe that was in the old
Right.
policy as well, which would allow for the educational purposes as deemed fit by the principal. I think this policy may just kind of explain that a little clearer. But I do believe, and I apologize, I don't have it in front of me.
I mean, I would like to see it that if it's in that way in the elementary school and middle school, that unless there is an excusable reason, those cell phones are put away all day. And that's the case in middle school. Now, I understand in high school they use them whatever they want. Every classroom has their own rule. I mean, that's what they said, the teacher decides.
Based for purposes of, for educational purposes, correct?
No, they said if they're finished their work, they can go get their phones out. They made it very clear that every teacher had their own rule. Now, if you want to leave it that way, that's one thing, but, you know.
Anyone else?
Can we revisit again, where does transportation, that comes on a total different policy? Or what are we doing where it says buildings and programs? Are those programs at the buildings and on the school property there? Or what happens where the programs and they're traveling in a bus?
So I think the bus, so transportation is not in here. And I think that would similarly vary based on age. There is information here talking about when students are attending school-sponsored activities.
This reads, the old policy says, the board prohibits use of devices by students during the school day in district buildings, on district property, on district buses and vehicles, during the time the students are under the supervision of the district, and in locker rooms, bathrooms, health suites, and other changing areas. So that implies, unless there's an exclusion, they can't use it during the school day. That was the old policy, which wasn't being followed in high school, but was being followed. Actually, not on the buses, because
But I will just point out, and I understand your point, in the original policy, one of the exceptions is classroom or instructional related activities, as well as other reasons determined appropriate by the building principal, which may be, for instance, we feel at the high school level, they can have their cell phones during lunch. And I think that would fall under that exclusion.
my argument was always, if I can use it in class A, my phone, and I have my phone available, then why can't I use it in classroom B? And I don't think the burden should be on the teacher to be the villain, or the one that says, I want them put away. And then how do you follow consequences? Again, it's clear in the elementary school and clear in middle school, and I think it should be clear in the policy how it is handled in elementary school and middle school, that it's away for the day. That's the rule. Now, how it's written up for high school, I think it should be clarified somehow, that it's left up to each. I don't know, that's kind of how I feel. Or whether we need to discuss the high school policy.
And
But
if I can share my experience being in high school, I think, to your point, one of the most challenging things that.
You're not talking about being in high school as a student, you're talking
No,
about being
we were falling from cell phones back then.
as a,
I remember getting called down when my mom would call the main office, and, but one of the biggest challenges as a principal is you would often hear from teachers, I'm following whatever rule it may be. But they're coming from a class, students might be coming from a class where, maybe a teacher's more lenient, and now I'm trying to toe the line. And I always saw it not as teachers, it's up to the teacher to make their own rule. I always saw it as, are the teachers consistent across the board in following what the rule is? And is there maybe one teacher more lenient and another teacher not? And I think that's incumbent on the teachers and the administration to make sure that there's consistency on how the rule is implemented in each classroom, versus it not necessarily being the teacher making up their own policy, if that makes sense.
Well, back to finishing on what, and as you added and said on the old policy, to clearly is building the programs on district property. So this policy is electronic devices really only on the district property? And is that how Is that
Or
the,
school-sponsored events,
on the school property?
any
Or-
school-sponsored event. So school-sponsored events could potentially be off
Off.
school property as well. And that would be the discretion of the administrator, whether or not, like, so for instance, technically, a football game is a school-sponsored event. Chances are the high school principal isn't going to prohibit the use of cell phones at a football game. But
Right.
they have the discretion as an administrator. My understanding is that any school-sponsored event, whether it's on campus or off campus, they can make that determination.
I think the larger one is the transportation one.
Yeah,
That, it's not articulated here, that somebody brought up. I think Ms. Horny brought it up. And I agree with Ronnie in that some of these things are articulated in the older policy, as Ms. Stone said. And you take a look at the date that the old policy was written, as Ronnie said, we're talking about Walkman and Blackberries, and the technology has advanced so far that, particularly at the high school level, we also heard from the teachers how they have kids use technology in the classrooms. And I just think that along with the medical reasons that we've heard about the carve-outs for, are important to consider in the discussion, because the technology continues to advance, and it looks different at the elementary school than it does in a social studies 11th grade class, or, a high school biology class perhaps. So I'm not sure how we're gonna walk that tightrope, but I think it's worth talking about all these things. Transportation plays into it, football games play into it. When you have an elementary school that goes to the middle school to do a performance, that's still a school-sponsored event. When our fourth graders go to the Churchville Nature Center, that's a school-sponsored event. So I think it's, where do we want to be with this? In order to have some guidelines for our staff, but also being mindful of the age difference at play here, and also the medical and safety issues. I mentioned last meeting, there's a product called Angel Sense that it's marketed to parents of children with autism. It's a safety device. We have students that carry a cell phone to read their blood sugar level who are diabetic. So this is a big, big area. And as we talk through it, I just want to make sure we hit on as many of those areas as we can and think through it carefully. Because we certainly don't want to make a decision that's going to penalize somebody with a medical need, nor do we want to penalize the AP biology class that's, looking at a dissection electronically. And how do we do that with having expectations in the schools?
But all those exceptions are all very clear. I think maybe if the policy had, in addition, had specific details for how elementary school is managed and how it's managed in the middle school and then in the high school.
And the question to that would be, where is it policy and where is it classroom management? So we heard Paige at the last meeting say she brings the cell phones in and they line them up on the chalk tray, or in today's day and age, the smartboard tray, right? And then she has had students use them for various reasons. We've heard teachers, I know of teachers that a student needs to call their parent, and the teacher says, at the elementary level, you have a cell phone, yeah, take your phone out and call. So there's some discretion in there. And so, again, it's where do we want to be collectively here, and where's the balance between what we want to put into policy and where you're giving the teachers the latitude to use discretion with regard to their classroom management.
Anybody? I have a question. Are we consistent across The elementary schools, and I know, what I heard was we're consistent at the middle schools and the high schools, but,
We're consistent as far as off and away during the day.
yeah, right.
And that's K to 8, what we heard at the last meeting. Where you will find inconsistency are in the examples I just used. A 5th grade student needs to call mom and dad, and although the policy says no devices during the school day, the teacher may say, do you have a cell phone, or here's my phone, call your parent. They used to be, you're gonna have to go down to the office and call. Where there is less consistency, it's at the high school level. And again, we heard the principals and some teachers talk about that, how it varies by class. That I would even venture to guess, it varies a little bit by school. I invited the board to lunch a week or two ago, and Mr. Hickey and I passed by each other. I said, it was a good lunch. He said, I would have been wondering how many kids were on their cell phones during lunch. That's not something I even thought of when I was in there that day. So it does vary. We do know some things that are not so good come out of social media during the school day. We know some things not so good come out of social media, not during the school day, but it spills into the school day. So again, I think this is a big conversation. And as we do it, I just want to make sure we're all thinking about, Ronnie, I'm taking your phrase, think about all the carve-outs. And I don't know exactly where that's supposed to be, but I do know, with our special ed population, particularly our nonverbal AS kids, the safety issue. I do know with our students with diabetes, the medical blood sugar issue, and there are others. So.
Thank you, Dr. Sanko.
I have a thought. I think you've done a great job updating this policy, and I think this is worthy of discussion. And as one board member, I'm happy that we're going through it. And I've been sitting here thinking and listening to both the concerns of, I don't know how to do this, or I'm concerned about that. And I've been hearing also some of the points and how this is different from other policies. And it occurs to me that for the most part, you're discussing about capabilities and distractions, either including them or excluding them, as opposed to talking about devices and specifics, i.e. Walkman, right? So it's the technology that moves, but the distraction or the capability doesn't really change too much, with one exception: telephone, pagers, devices, and beepers. That's another one that's right up there with Walkman that we don't do anymore. The only pagers and beepers, I think, are what you get at a restaurant when you're waiting for your table. But the purpose for that, or the capability of the intent, was that distraction in class of the dee-dee-dee, dee-dee-dee, dee-dee-dee that might go off if someone got paged. And I'm wondering if that's similar to a message or a chat or a text or something along those lines that might be sufficiently distracting. But of course, we have the capability of muting things. So I also like the ability for the principal or the building to make adjustments and the teacher to also make adjustments. But I also agree with Mrs. Stone and how that is complicated of one teacher is set up as the hero and the other one is the villain because he or she, whatever, won't let me use my phone or something like that. So I think that's your answer, is talk about capabilities and distractions, and that might have longer life than talking about specific electronic devices.
And I think that's a very fair, we kind of went back and forth when we were talking about the beepers. I think in our conversations, some of the areas that still use beepers, I think are, for instance, EMTs, and particularly like volunteer fire departments, they still utilize beepers, and so we put that in there specifically, but have that principal carve out later on. We couldn't really think of any other groups that may utilize actual beepers anymore. other than potentially nefarious
Right.
purposes. I think that's why we ended up keeping it in there with the understanding that it may be something we take out as we discuss this policy further. And maybe whether we take it out completely, whether we have my favorite term, carve out for, first responders, and stuff like that. But I'd rather, we discussed, let's put it in there so we can have it as part of the conversation.
And I appreciate Ms. Stone's point too, that if you have guardrails from K to 12, right, at least we have the guardrails up. And we heard again last meeting, K to 8, they're following pretty closely what the antiquated policy says, not so much at the high school. So, that's another thing that I think we need to talk about. We need to figure out how do we frame it in a systemic way for all of our students and all of our schools. I think they're all good points.
Ms. Kelly?
I mean, we had that discussion last time, and I don't think I've changed my mind since then. I think that there are cases that the students need their phones. I mean, high school, absolutely. It has to be, they use it for educational purposes, they use it for like communication with the family. You don't want to go to the principal's office, like make sure if you're going to pick you up from, if you have to be picked up and so on. But even like for younger students, I would like to know where everybody is. So, and if my child is on the bus or is supposed to be on the bus, if it's not on the bus, I can track with their phone where they are. If there's an emergency, even if it's like an elementary student, maybe I can like reach out to my child. So I want to trust the administration and the principals to handle this situation. And apparently they do, because they don't allow it really in elementary school unless it is absolutely necessary, and with the middle school. So they're the people who are with the students every day, and they can manage how to use technology appropriately. I mean, when the previous policy was written, that was like ages ago. Technology-wise, things have changed so much, and you can use the technology now for educational purposes as well. So for the most part, I'm fine with the way this new policy is written, and I would encourage even more use of cell phones when they're on the bus, so you know where they are, because there's a lot of cases that I know of kids that all of a sudden the parents have no idea where the child is.
You know what they're strange.
Ms. Kelly?
Yeah, I don't know how I ever survived. I mean, seriously, the reliance on this is ridiculous. Like I said, how do we ever make it onto this table without cell phones? Jeez. I mean, and that's the problem. I mean, I agree, okay, I don't want to say I don't want to know where my kid is 24 hours a day, but, I'm not tracking my child. Maybe something can be done, like you said, for the buses, that we could carve out, maybe it's during school hours or whatnot. I get your point about football games and 1 hour. No, everybody's on their phone. But what it is we have to have a consistent rule. There's, like everybody was saying, at the elementary school and the middle school, there's a consistent rule. Like, what's the difference between a 7th grader and a 12th grader as it relates to the use of electronic devices? Really, there's nothing, other than maybe for classroom work, and fine, that's a carve out that you would have for that. But we need to have, the teachers can't be the bad guys, and also, and they also can't be almost the administrators of this. Like, for example, if in my perfect world, every high school room would have that jacket. And it's a given. You walk into the classroom, you put the device in there, and you don't take it out until the teacher says you can take it out. But everybody should know, you walk into the room, it goes in there. I don't care what, even if it's a graphic arts class, where you may use that cell phone at some point in time, but you may not be using it every day. And those days that you're not using the cell phone, it stays in the jacket. It stays somewhere. And the other thing as it relates, and maybe this is the wrong policy or the time, as it relates to the bad things that we're doing with cell phones. As much as I was a proponent and an advocate of the drug and alcohol policy being too stringent, and, advocated for getting it down to 10 days from 45. I think maybe our punishment for these things is too lenient, where the kids, I'm not sure exactly what happens, but, if you're taking a selfie of yourself and showing it to someone else or whatever, maybe that warrants a 45-day suspension or something, where the kids get the idea, if you're gonna break these rules and you're gonna cyberbully other kids, the punishment's gonna be more severe for your phone, because this is the kind of stuff that's happening. But as it relates to cell phone usage, like you said, I think we just need to have consistency, because why should, it's set up to the building principals. So that means that Mr. Chiskevich, at North can have a totally different idea of what Mr. Raddick wants to do at South. And if he says it's okay, well, no, it should be consistent throughout the district, and it should be consistent from classroom to classroom. So Mrs. Smith doesn't have to be the villain and Mr. Jones gets to be the nice guy. It's in there. I mean, personally, I wouldn't even say it in there. I'd say leave it in your bag. But, that's probably archaic, but every classroom should be set up just like the middle schools. That thing's in there, it goes in there. If you need it for some reason, it's there. If you're if you have a reason, like if you're diabetic, you're an EMT, whatever, okay, but the teacher knows, he probably knows those students who fall into that category, as opposed to the students who's just farting around in his cell phone, trying to keep an eye on a class, and this kid's under there, and, he's just texting as we go along and doing all those other things. I just think it should be consistent from classroom to classroom, so the teachers don't have to be put under the gun on how they're going to administer it. And it's a real easy thing. They come in, boom, they look, the teacher looks in, all the jackets are filled up. At the end of the, you need it for graphic arts. Hey, look, all right, everybody get your thing. Or maybe when they come in, hey, we're going to be using our cell phones today. You can take it with you to your class. But I'm going to say, I don't know of too many, say social studies or English classes where you really need your cell phone. They're fewer and far between. And most of the kids, they have laptops and everything else, which assists them in the classroom. So the cell phone becomes a non-necessity. And I would love to see it in, not using it in lunchtime. I'd like to see the communication between students, but I get it. A high school kid, for example, might need to check with the job and whether or not he's going to work in the afternoon or something like that, or, communicate with somebody, and that might be his only chance. Okay, well then he has that 45-minute period of time to use his cell phone. But there's, like I said, we have cell phones for the beginning of time until the last 15 years, and now all of a sudden we can't move without them. I just think that's part of what's wrong with what's going on today. And
Ms. Stowe?
Yeah, I have the same feeling, because if every classroom has that, then not using the cell phone in class should be the rule, not the exception. You have all the exceptions here. And the other thing, think back over the other survey results that we had, that one of our biggest problems is gambling. That's all cell phone. I would guess it's 90% of the problem is on cell phones. That could be one way to at least reduce that a little bit.
Anybody else?
And then the kids still have the phones if they have to, between classes and lunchroom, unless, I'd like to see more interaction with kids as opposed to, sitting there with their phones all during lunch. Go out with your family to dinner at a restaurant and you look around and no one is talking to each other. They're all on their phones. I just think it's
We are not going to solve that.
bad.
I'll share a story to Ms. Polly and Mr. Hickey about, being able to track kids. Many, many years ago, before cell phones were so prevalent, they had the Apple, or they called AirTags.
Yeah.
The Apple AirTags. We got a frantic call at the school because the parents thought something was wrong with the elementary student because the parent wasn't able to see the tracking on the AirTag. And so our parents are using that kind of system in a lot of cases. I can't give you hard data on that, but even before kids in first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth had cell phones, parents were finding a way to track and make sure, with safety being a concern. So that's a real thing.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Short, brief. I think that I like this conversation. There's a lot of things around to discuss and consider. And I don't think I'm solid on any one or the other, one way or the other, except for one. There are these devices where they put their phones in it and they get locked. I don't like the idea of locking the device at all. And so whatever results of this, from mild to wild, I think it's too extreme to require students to lock their phones in something. That's the one that I know that I'm not for. Maybe there's areas where this is an issue, but I find in this community, I think a lot of the parents and the teachers are restrained enough and capable enough to adhere to it stays on the chalkboard, or it stays in the bag, or it stays in my pocket. I don't think it, or goes in a shoe container. I don't think it needs to be locked. And I think that we open ourselves up to serious problems if we're locking devices. So that's the one that I think that I'm pretty firm about.
We've talked through that, and like any good company that markets, as soon as the conversation began at the national level, we are getting marketed these lock boxes, and it's costly.
Yeah.
But when you think about it just practically, the amount of time it's going to take 25 students to put a cell phone in, lock it, and then at the end of how much instruction time are you losing, the cost for doing it, and I think I can speak for the internal conversations we had. We are in agreement with that we know some districts that are doing that, but the other part of it is, at what point does it become a liability to the district when a student says they put their cell phone in and now the screen is broken? So we've talked all around it, and I think that at least internally, the administration would agree with exactly what you said, that locking it down is probably going too far.
And the kids never remember the combinations. They don't remember the password. I don't remember passwords.
First floor to the third floor.
Anybody else?
Just a quick comment here. So I totally agree with Mr. Roosevelt. Until you said that, I wouldn't even consider it a lockbox to put away phones. But this is just for discussion and to look at, right? So it's like, I agree. I'm not sure where to pick this apart or put it together. So it's just kind of.
Well, when we started the conversation, we said we expected this to be lengthy. We wanted to go slow and be careful, because we don't want to be too constraining, and we don't want to be, in a position where cell phones and electronic devices are the top priority, but sensitive to the needs of the students.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate some of the comments. I think many or most of the board members wanting to be considerate of, the teachers and how much they have already under, their responsibilities. I'm curious, is it at all, specifically at the high school level, to get some sort of gauge from the high school teachers to see where they kind of fall into this? Because, we sit around and make this decision that's going to impact, 2 high schools and all the students and teachers in it, where in reality, how many of us have actually been through the times that I've been through throughout the high schools, during different events. I've never seen a situation where I looked at the phones and thought, wow, that classroom is out of control with everyone on their phones. Most of the time, most of the classrooms that I had seen or walked by, they had those pockets. And any of the classrooms where students were engaged, they were either on laptops or doing things. I never saw or went into a classroom where I saw kids wildly, texting or making videos or whatever it is, that can be done on a cell phone. So before we move in the process at some point, if it's reasonable to get some sort of snapshot or survey, even if it's a casual thing among staff to kind of get their gauge.
We have a sense of it, and I can assure you that, there's some of it going on that shouldn't be going on that we probably don't even know about.
Correct.
But we're in classrooms all the time, and by and large, our kids are doing what they're supposed to be doing when they're supposed to be doing it. So we have just anecdotal, observational information, and we heard a little bit from the high school principals and teachers, but we can do more with that. And I think Mr. Hickey's question to me in passing, what does it look like in the cafeteria, is a good one. Because I was just last week in South again, and cell phones didn't jump out to me in the moment. That doesn't mean with 350 students in there, 200 were on them. I don't know, but we can get more information on that.
Yeah, when we had lunch at South a couple weeks ago, I think 350 students were talking at once to each other, it seemed like. But yeah, I mean, it is a tough issue. I've heard opinions on both sides, but what I heard when Mr. Raddick was here, and you say Paige was the teacher we heard from? Yeah, that there's not a problem that we need to solve. I didn't hear them say, yes, we need the board's help in addressing this cell phone problem. It sounds like in their view, the teacher was saying, this is how I manage it in my classroom. And this is how Mr. Raddick was saying, this is how our teachers do it. So I understand why parents are concerned about cell phone use, because it is a horrible thing when you're trying to talk to a kid and they've got a phone in front of them, and when they're, they should be doing things other than staring at their phone. It's very frustrating, but I'm not sure that it's a problem in the high schools that we need to fix. And the problem doesn't exist in the middle schools and the elementary schools because the phones are away all day. So, but I'm glad we're addressing it. I mean, people are addressing it all over the country, so this is good.
If anything, we're at least updating so the language is more relevant to 2024.
Yeah, and it's, our policy, to your point, should reflect our practice, which it doesn't exactly do right now. So, anybody else? Motion to adjourn? Second? We're adjourned.
Third.
Thank you, Matt, thank you.
Thank you, Matt.